It actually started with a red paper clip, actually kind of like this one right here. You guys may have remembered the story about a Canadian by the name of Kyle McDonald, kind of a college-aged young man about 10 years ago. All he had to his name at that point was a red paper clip, and he was in desperate need of housing. So much so that extended family members were putting the pressure on him to get out. And so he went ahead and, have any of you played the story Bigger or Better? We've had some youth groups come by the house since we moved to this house in Littleton, and they would bring something, and they would ask, do you have anything bigger or better than this that you would trade? And so I don't know what it was, maybe a plastic flower or something that they had. So Gayla would trade them one flip-flop that we had left over, and they would go on to the next door and try to trade for something bigger or better. All Kyle had was this red paper clip. And so he decided what he would do is kind of document his story, and his hopes was that he could trade up to a house. Now, the first trade that he made happened within just a few moments after he posted on Craigslist that he was wanting to trade up to a house, knowing that a paperclip probably wouldn't do it, but if anybody's interested in a red paperclip, and within just a few moments, two ladies from a neighboring town had an ink pen that looked like a fish that they were willing to trade him for his red paperclip. And the story goes, and there were a number of other things that he ended up trading, 14 trades in all. In fact, some of those were, for the fish pen, he got a kind of this really odd-looking doorknob that he decided, or the person that wanted it, could put on the top of an espresso coffee pot type thing. They were really excited about that. So they traded that for that doorknob. And then for the doorknob, he got a camping stove. And so it took about 2 months for somebody to finally come up with something that he was willing to trade for that. For the camping stove, he got a generator. For the generator, he got an instant party, including a full keg of beer. That one went pretty quick. There was a gentleman in a neighboring province of Canada that had a snowmobile that he was willing to trade for the instant party. The deal was, this guy with the snowmobile was somewhat famous. He was a radio show guy in that part of Canada, and so his snowmobile he traded for that instant party, and then coupled with his radio, or with his snowmobile, was somebody that was willing to offer a radio, or a recording contract for that famous, not the snowmobile, but the guy who owned the snowmobile, his snowmobile. And so that was traded. Somebody in Phoenix, Arizona was willing to trade for that recording contract 1 month of free rent in a duplex. Now, that wasn't a house, but he was getting closer, and so he went ahead and traded that. The neighbor next door, part of the duplex, she was renting that part, and come to find out, she really wanted the free rent in the other part of the duplex, so she was trying to figure out what she could trade for that. She worked for Alice Cooper, the old rocker, some of you might remember. And she got him to cough up one free afternoon with a fan. And so somebody traded for an afternoon with Alice Cooper a full year's rent in that duplex. And so all that came about. That went to, then he was able to trade the afternoon with Alice Cooper for a snow globe. And you think, oh, that's where it went terribly bad. No, actually, this snow globe he kept for a while. He had a pretty good idea. Corbin Benson, the actor, was a great snow globe collector. This particular snow globe had the rock band Kiss on it. It was signed, and so it was up on an auction for a trade. It had to be something bigger and better. And so Corbin Benson was interested in getting that snow globe. His trade for that snow globe then was an act part in a movie that he was filming. And so that part of the movie then was what he was left with. And he didn't know if he was actually going to make it. This was out now 14 months later. And so he's still kind of bumming off the folks. He's still kind of doing some crazy things. But there was a town in Canada that decided that they were interested in that movie part. And they would trade him a house for that movie part. They then had the entire town come out and audition for a part in a movie with Corbin Benson. That was what they were willing to trade. And so that's how they did that. 14 months later, from one paperclip to a house. Now, before you all start looking for red paper clips, isn't it amazing when we consider what is bigger and better, how big and how good our God is? Because as we look and consider our own lives and what we've got sometimes may not seem to be much, but God is willing to trade and has his son, Jesus Christ, for us. And so we can trade up. And that's a pretty exciting thing. I've been excited about this reading program, this Challenge 365 that we've been a part of, or Challenge 183 that we've been a part of for the past several months, because as we were putting this together close to a year ago, we were thinking about what we could do even on the weekends. And in addition to classes and groups and the stuff that's online, what we wanted to do is have whatever was preached on that weekend make a beeline to Jesus. Because that's what we realize in God's Word, wherever we are at, oftentimes we are able to track right to Jesus. And so we were excited about that as we were getting ready to put the different messages together and the different things that are a part of Challenge 365 that many of you have been reading and a part of this year. I'm so excited because tonight, the passage that I was given the opportunity to preach was this one on the cross in Mark chapter 15. And so if you would please, out of reverence for the Word, out of more important, respect for Christ, would you please stand and read with me this passage from Mark chapter 15, starting in verse 24, and we'll go to verse 39. Then the soldiers nailed him to the cross. They divided his clothes and threw dice to decide who would get each piece. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. A sign announced the charge against him. It read, "The King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Ha! Look at you now," they yelled at him. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well then, save yourself and come down from the cross." The leading priests and teachers of religious law also mocked Jesus. "He saved others," they scoffed, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross so we can see it and believe him." Even the men who were crucified with Jesus ridiculed him. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. Then at 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a reed stick so that he could drink. "Wait," he said, "let's see whether Elijah comes to take him down." Then Jesus uttered another loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the Roman officer who stood facing him saw how he had died, he exclaimed, "This man truly was the Son of God." Amen. Thank you. That's what we're looking at this evening, this cross-examination. There is a lot that's going on in this passage that we've just finished reading together. There is a lot that's happening. This, coupled with the other gospel accounts, gives us a really very well-rounded picture of everything that was happening in those hours leading up to Jesus' death. There was a lot of things, and the atmosphere was thick. The atmosphere was difficult. There was a political environment that was happening. And in that political environment, I don't know if it has any connection with us today, but there was a lot of political struggle that was happening. There were Jews that were really struggling with the Roman authority that was over them. So much so that it was just a constant tension between those groups. And in Jerusalem at this time, this was the Passover week, there is a swelling of the city. And all of the Jews are coming, and there are a number of them that are there. And the Romans are on high alert. Those guards, those centurions, those officers are on high alert to keep in suppression those that were coming to Jerusalem. There was a lot of tension in the air politically. Also, there was what we read, there was some natural elements. Now, in some of the other gospel accounts, are talked about an earthquake. We have been able to unearth, maybe in the Dead Sea Scrolls is where where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. We unearthed an audio version of all of this, what was happening here. And so, what I want you to do is kind of imagine yourself in that place as we listen now to what was happening as Jesus was soon to die or about to die or had just recently died, breathed his last. That natural element, did you hear it? There was a ripping sound of fabric. We read about it earlier, and it said that the temple curtain was torn into, how? Top to bottom, which is significant because the gospel accounts indicate that there was this tearing from top to bottom, not from bottom to top. These were incredibly large curtains. And granted, there was an earthquake that was going on at this time, the other gospel accounts refer to. But there's this ripping, and it wasn't the outer courtyard curtain, it was the curtain between the holiest of holies and the outer courtyard there. Which is significant because the holiest of holies, that's where God resided when the priest would go in one time a year to meet with God. And this temple curtain was being torn from top to bottom. In essence, God saying, no more. There's no more barrier between he and man. There's no more secret hiding place. There is no more barrier because of what Jesus has done for us. And so, in addition to the political environment and the atmosphere that was going on, the natural elements, but there was also this relational storm. You remember that? The relational storm that Jesus was dealing with as a part of the atmosphere there was just with his disciples. There was maybe confusion. You can all remember this different stories through the different Gospels, but primarily through Mark was just after this passage was when Peter had denied Christ. And there were so many other things that were going on there. The betrayal of Judas was happening just prior to that. Just a lot of relational difficulty and yuck. It was hard. And so the atmosphere was really difficult. And so I got to thinking about, because of where I was guessing that we would be at this point in the sermon, I decided we needed a little bit of a lighter moment. And so what we're going to do now, because you guys have been reading the Word regularly and particularly in Mark this past week, and you read it in either day 211, 12, 13, somewhere in there, some of the different aspects of who said what. So we're going to play this little game. So whose line is this? Or who said that? All right, so this is where you, as a part of the congregation here, this is congregational participation. So here we go. Who said this? I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. Okay. That's her yes. Okay. Actually, it was the demon-possessed boy's father that said that. In Mark chapter 9, verses 24, it's interesting that this is all that he is referred to as, the father of the demon-possessed boy. But then I got to thinking about that, and in reality, in a big group, oftentimes I'm referred to as, well, that's Gayla's husband. Or that's Cade's dad, or Kylie's dad, or Chloe's dad, or Kale's dad. And so that isn't probably too far from a stretch that this is just how he was known. Now, reality is, I'm glad to be known as her husband. Actually, today is our anniversary, 28 years. And it was Saturday that we were actually married on, so 28 years ago. And so I don't mind that at all, being referred to as her husband, or the guy she married, or that guy. That's fine. Okay, back to this. The next one. Who said, I am? There you go. And they continued on, and we'll look at the rest of that verse in Mark chapter 14, verse 62. The next one says, you were one of those with Jesus of Nazareth. Who said that? One of the servant girls said that in Mark chapter 14, verse 67. Would you like me to release to you the King of the Jews? Pilate said that one in Mark chapter 15, verse 9. And who said, we've already read this, who said this man truly was the Son of God? In Mark, it actually says a Roman officer. He's oftentimes referred to as a centurion in the other Gospels. A centurion was an official, a Roman official of some kind, and there may have been as many as 50 of them in Jerusalem at this time. A centurion oversaw 100 Roman soldiers. And so there is some speculation that this centurion, who was responsible for overseeing the crucifixion, may have been the same centurion that was earlier on in the gospel, who had asked for one of his slaves to be healed. Now that's speculation. There's no way for us to necessarily know that that's accurate or not. That makes for a nice story. Ernest Borgnine did that one time as that centurion. But we don't know that that's necessarily accurate because there were at least 50 of them in Jerusalem at that time, and it could have been many, many more. But this centurion, I think, or this Roman officer has something to say. And we've already read that once already, but we'll look at that here in just a moment as well. In this cross-examination, we need to also hear from Jesus. And there's an aspect where Jesus has this show and tell element to his life. Up until this point, the interaction that the Roman officer had, or this centurion had with Jesus, he had overseen the crucifixion of Jesus to this point. And he got to see Jesus in a particularly new light, a unique light, than he had ever got to see anybody before. See, this demonstration of Jesus' show and tell, his demonstration was that he responded when necessary and he was silent when appropriate. When he was on trial with not just Pilate, but also the Jewish leaders, there was interaction, and there were times that Jesus did respond, and there were times that he did not. He elected to be quiet. And this Roman officer saw that. Now, he had been around a bunch of folks and had been responsible for death of many prior. And he got to see so many different things, but this Jesus was different because he wasn't pleading for his life. He wasn't trying to make a deal. He was one who responded when necessary and was silent when was appropriate. Also, from Jesus' own lips, this aspect of show and tell, which I think is a great, great element for us to emulate, is this aspect of speaking. We already talked about this just a moment ago in Matthew chapter 14. Actually, on your outline, it's verse 62, not 16. So you might want to write that in, but it's verse 62. He says, I am. This is response to the high priest asking him if he was the Messiah. He said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven. Mark chapter 14, verse 62. In another opportunity, just a little while long, actually, I'm sorry, in Mark 15, verse 2, in response to Pilate asking him if he was the king of the Jews, he had said, as you said, you have said it. It is true. So he's responding when appropriate. The next opportunity that we get to hear it from his own lips is in Mark chapter 15, verse 34. He said, my God, why have you abandoned me? There's a lot of interactions that are happening here. But the show and tell that we see that Jesus has is real. It is not fake. It is not pleading. It is authentic. And it's something that this Roman official had never, ever seen before. In fact, the Roman, or the centurion's observation and testimony is what I want us to take a look at now. Because death was a big, big part of this guy's life. He had routinely provided oversight of the crucifixion of many. Of many. He knew what death looked like. He knew how long these types of things typically would last. He knew what a cat of nine tails would do to the back and ribs of somebody as they were struck, and then ripped back. He was there when the crown of thorns was fashioned and jammed onto Jesus' head. He saw that. And what he also saw, in addition to the mockery that his soldiers were providing, is Jesus' show and tell. It hurt. It had to have hurt. But he didn't see Jesus pleading for his life. He didn't see Jesus wanting to make a deal, promising, begging. He did not see that. He had seen that multiple times before. What he saw was Jesus accepting the scorn and the shame of the crucifixion. And then the progression to the cross. See, he knew what a dead person looked like. And as Jesus died, we heard the earthquake rumble. We heard the curtain rip. As Jesus had finished and breathed his last, all that Roman officer could say is like what you, as a believer in Christ, have said. Surely this was the Son of God. This man was totally different than anybody I've ever seen who's gone through that. We don't have any more of this Roman officer's story. But I had to think of that it's interesting. As that curtain was ripped from top to bottom, and a new pathway and a relationship opportunity between God and man being able through because of the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus Christ. Isn't it interesting that the first one to give testimony, the first one we have recorded giving testimony to who Jesus is, was this Roman official. This was nobody that was from the Jewish line, God's family, God's people. This was an outsider for sure. But he recognized that this was the Son of God. As he's examining the cross, I got to thinking about him and trying to put my feet in his sandals and wondering about the blood on my hands. What about the reality of that new life that this Roman official expressed, this identity that he may soon be in because of what Jesus has done? Do you think he was maybe wanting to trade up? He had seen something way better than what he'd been around. Do you think he had a hope, realizing who Jesus was, especially on the heels of what had just happened? I think he was hoping to trade up for something bigger and better, for something way, way bigger and way, way better. This examination of the cross gives us opportunity. In your bulletin, there is a connection card. It looks like this. If you would, please go ahead and detach that and consider the next steps that are listed there. There may be somebody here this evening. This is maybe a fairly small crowd for us on a Saturday night. But there may still be somebody here this evening that has never identified, never testified to the reality that Jesus is the Son of God. Now it's time for you to trade up, if I were you. And so that's a next step option for you. Another one will be that you're going to show and tell. Maybe you have had a relationship with Christ for at least a little while, maybe a long while, but now's an opportunity for you to show and tell. If at anything at least, you have the opportunity to testify that this is the Son of God. The worship host, after our communion time tonight, will take the opportunity to receive these from you. I want you to take a little bit of time. But right now is another opportunity, another next step that we as believers get to participate in on a regular weekly basis here as a part of this church family. And if you're a believer, we want you to celebrate this time with us as well. You see, Jesus, prior to all this stuff that we've been talking about this evening, prior to all of that, he had sat down with his disciples and said these types of things were going to be happening. He was going to be offering himself up as a living sacrifice so that they could have an eternity. So that an eternity could be offered to all. And so tonight, there'll be trays that'll come to you. And on that tray will be small bits of bread and small cups of juice. The bits of bread will help us remember that body that Jesus had physically and the pain and the agony that happened as he was going through this time of crucifixion. The juice is to help us remember the blood that was shed for us. The blood that cleanses us. And kind of imagine that. You know, there were so many religious laws at this time about how they were to handle certain things. Dead things and bloody things. There were particular things that they were supposed to do. And Jesus was saying, my blood is now the covenant. That is what is going to cleanse you. That had to be a little mind-blowing for those that were hearing that for the first time. Wait a minute. We're not even supposed to be touching blood. And Jesus now, like God ripped that curtain, has changed things for us and provided access. We have a hope. You have a hope. Because of your testimony that surely this was the Son of God. And by partaking in communion tonight, that's your story. That's your line. That's what you can say and testify towards, that this was the Son of God. Would you pray with me? Our dear Heavenly Father, we know that we have a hope. And we know that you have provided that for us through your Son, Jesus Christ. We want to take the next several moments to reflect on how big and better that gift is than what we had before. As your people, as your children, as yours who you have died for, who your Son Jesus sacrificed for. Thank you so much that we can remember.